Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm pleased to rise on behalf of Canadians living with disabilities in the Ontario Winter Games hosting riding of Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke. Bill C-22, the False Hope Bill, meets the Liberals' net zero goal. There's net zero benefit to Canadians living with disabilities. After 8 years of incompetence and corruption, the Liberal approach is to deny, delay, and deflect. If dragging their feet were an Olympic sport, the Liberals would sweep the podium. In 2015, with unanimous support, the House passed my private member's bill to protect Canadians living with disabilities from predatory vulture companies. These vultures offer to help Canadians living with disabilities complete the disability tax credit form. After completing a one-page form, these companies charge up to 30% of the tax credit intended for Canadians facing additional living costs due to disabilities. Thousands of Canadians lost millions of dollars to these vultures. Sadly, Canadians living with disabilities, for Canadians living with disabilities, my bill was passed shortly before the Liberals took power. Whether out of partisan spite or just Liberal indifference to Canadians living with disabilities, this gang took 7 years to pass one page of regulations required to make the law actually work. 7 years! 7 years of predatory vulture companies taking a 30% cut of the disability tax credit. 7 years to pass regulations which can be printed on a single sheet of paper. It then took them 7 years to help Canadians living with disabilities. Now they're at it again. Bill C-22 was originally Bill C-35. It had to be reintroduced after this Prime Minister called his super spreader pandemic election campaign. Canadians living with disabilities need to remember the political interests of the Liberal parties always come first. It's been 3 years since this bill was introduced, but even if I could snap my fingers and pass the bill right now, Canadians living with disabilities would still not see any help from this government. That's because the bill is TBD, to be determined. How much will the benefit be? TBD. Will the benefits be clawed back? TBD. Who is even eligible to receive it? T-bleeping-D. At committee, the minister said it would be at least a year before Canadians living with disabilities would have the answers to those basic questions. My private member's bill to protect Canadians living with disabilities from vulture companies required just one regulation. And the regulation was to set the maximum amount these vultures could charge. It took 7 years to set the maximum at $100. Canadians living with disabilities waited 7 years for one regulation from these Liberals, and now these Liberals are claiming they'll pass the dozens required regulations in 1 year. It would actually be a great relief to Canadians living with disabilities as this government admitted the delay in regulating vulture companies was out of partisan spite. And if that wasn't the reason for the delay, it means this government's incompetent. It means Canadians living with disabilities could be waiting years for financial assistance, and that is unacceptable. It's why Conservatives pushed for and successfully secured an amendment requiring the minister to report back in 6 months of this bill passing on the progress to pass the required regulations. The challenge is that this type of accountability measure only works in governments with the capacity to feel shame. Unfortunately, shamelessness is a defining feature of this Prime Minister and his government. Madam Speaker, I'm not the first one to say this Prime Minister cares more about style over substance. Former Finance Minister Morneau literally wrote a book about it. This Disability Benefit Act might just be the purest form of Liberals' style over substance problem. There are no dollars budgeted for this bill, yet to hear the government members speak, Canadians might think this bill has already passed and completely solved poverty. But a press release is not policy, and the devil is always in the details. And in the case of this proposed disability benefit, the devil is the clawback, and the details are the provinces. My colleagues on the committee proposed an amendment to prevent the benefit from being clawed back. The Liberals voted against it. The minister claims a clawback is a red line when negotiating the creation of a benefit with the provinces. Yet the Liberals voted against putting that into legislation. How can the minister claim a red line exists for this government when our own Liberals voted against it? If Canadians living with disabilities are worried about this government's track record on passing regulations, that should be doubly true with any required negotiations with the provinces. I know some Liberals will point to the speed with which they, quote, negotiated with the provinces on $10 a day daycare. Some negotiating. Here's some money, go spend it on daycare. Negotiating the disability benefit will be much harder. In this case, the provinces have some actual leverage. How many Liberals will appreciate that leverage will depend more on the electoral fortunes of the Liberal Party in that particular province. Inevitably, this will leave Canadians living with disabilities facing a patchwork of policies depending on the province. Sorry, Madam Speaker, I misspoke. Inevitable means it's certain to happen. But when it comes to this government, nothing is certain except the pursuit of its own political interests. Canadians living with disabilities don't deserve to experience more uncertainty. They need our support to live full lives and participate fully in society, including in the workforce. This was an urgent bill when it was first introduced 3 years ago. As Liberal spending fueled the cost of living crisis, that urgency has only increased. Yet for this Prime Minister, the most urgent matter wasn't passing the original legislation, it was calling his super spreader election. After 8 years of this corrupt Liberal government, Canadians living with disabilities are even worse off. Just as inflation has made it more expensive to live, this government is making it easier to die. We've heard testimony at committee of Canadians living with disabilities considering assisted suicide because the government's spending is driving up inflation. And it's only more chilling when the director of the Centre for Professional and Applied Ethics at the University of Manitoba says he was, quote, rather proud that Canada has done so well in terms of organ donation by MAID patients, end quote. Then we have the Minister of Justice claiming, remember that suicide generally is available to people. This is a group of people who within a population for physical reasons and possibly mental reasons can't make that choice for themselves, to do it themselves, end quote. When Canadians hear those quotes, they're right to think Canada is broken. We have a so-called ethicist celebrating organ harvesting and a justice minister claiming a right to be killed through the help of the state. And we have a Liberal government that will take 7 years to pass one regulation to protect Canadians living with disabilities. The urgency to pass legislation that delivers tangible benefits is real. Every minute the Liberals delay getting this money back into the bank accounts puts lives at risk. The members across the aisle might roll their eyeballs, but 35% of Canadians who died by assisted suicide in 2021 felt they were a burden on a family, friends, or caregivers. This government was warned repeatedly of the danger of expanding assisted suicide posed. And the loudest warnings came with those living with disabilities, came from them. It was not because we live in a structurally ableist society. It's because the rhetoric from the governments about helping Canadians living with disabilities that never matches the money actually spent. What money we do provide will be clawed back the very minute they try to improve their financial situations. And that's why it's truly immiserating for Canadians living with disabilities. Structural impoverishment by government policy is a kind of hopelessness which drives people to commit suicide. It's a kind of despair which can only be fueled by promises of benefits which never actually arrive. Put yourself in the shoes of someone who's reached that breaking point in 2020, in late that year. They're encouraged to hold on. They're told a benefit which will make a material improvement in their lives is on the way. They watch for any sign that relief is near. Their hope grows when they hear legislation is being introduced with all party support. But then there's the Prime Minister's urgent superspreader election.
Questions et commentaires. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government, the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Canadian Heritage.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. It was very interesting to listen to that speech on this particular bill that we're debating, but most of the time was spent talking about her own bill that was passed some time ago, which was bizarre to make it about herself. But I guess that's an occupational hazard in this place. My question is, as she's talking down this piece of legislation, I wonder if she could explain why did she vote for it at second reading, and if she's going to vote for this bill going forward, and if so, why?
The Honourable Member for Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke.
Okay, so that bill passed with all party support, and then the election happened. But the people living with disabilities wait to hear that this government considers subsidies for television producers to be more important for Parliament to consider. Then the Liberals introduced their news media subsidy legislation. We see this Prime Minister considers money for bribing reporters to be more important than the disability benefit legislation. And just so Canadians living with disabilities really understand where they rank in terms of Liberal priorities, this government said harassing lawful firearms owners was more important than providing a disability benefit to those living with disabilities.
Questions and comments? L'Honorable Députée de Thérèse de Blainville.
The Honourable Member for Thérèse de Blainville. Thank you, Madam Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for her presentation. Even though I don't agree with all of her statements, I am on the committee that had an opportunity to study C-22. There is one thing I do agree with, and I'd like to ask a question about it. What is unprecedented in this bill is the fact that the amount included in the benefit and the criteria for its eligibility will be decided through the regulation process with no parliamentary oversight at all. We don't know what the amount of the benefit will be. We don't know if it really will complement what is done in Quebec and the provinces. We don't know whether it will really do anything about poverty. We have passed certain modifications in committee concerning eligibility criteria and about the amount. We want these issues to be studied by Parliament, but our amendment was voted down. What does my colleague think about this?
For Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke.
Madam Speaker, just before Christmas, I started receiving phone calls on C-22. Oh, please make sure you vote for C-22. And I thought, well, I better look and make sure I know what I'm calling them about. And I looked at the bill, and I started scrolling through, and I thought my iPad was frozen because there was nothing there. I looked, and it said coming into force, but what was coming into force? So I can already hear the grumbling across the aisle, Madam Speaker. They'll claim they do care about Canadians living with disabilities, but how many of them were in this House 8 years ago when we passed the Disability Tax Credit Promoters Restriction Act unanimously? And I know the member from Papineau was there. He too supported the legislation to help Canadians living with disabilities. But then when he became Prime Minister, it took 7 years to pass one regulation, and I pray that's not the case with the Canada Disability Benefit. And given the greasy slope this country seems to be on, we don't have another 7 years to wait.
We have time for a brief question. The Honourable Member for Vancouver-Kingsway.
Well, thank you, Madam Speaker. I bring a bit of a personal experience to this debate. Our youngest child lives with a disability, and she's 27 years old, and we've been working with other parents in the disability community, so I know how important this disability benefit is. I also really share my colleague's comment that it's cruel to continue to make promises to this community and not deliver. I was also in this House from 2008 to 2015, though, when her government, the Conservatives, sat back while millions of people with disabilities didn't receive such a benefit as is before the House today. Curiously, that's about the same amount of time it's taken this Liberal government. My question, though, is this. What amount of benefit does she think is appropriate to support persons with disabilities? And second, we have a dental bill before this House that would bring dental care to millions of Canadians living with disabilities. Can she tell us why she voted against?
The honourable member for Renfrew-Nipissing-Pembroke, a brief answer, please.
Okay, so the first question there was about what we did as Conservatives when we were in power. Well, I remember our dearly beloved Jim Flaherty, who had 2 sons living with disabilities, brought in a number of disability savings accounts because he knew that there would be a time when the parents, he and his wife, would not be there to care for them. So he put together not only a bill, but implemented a savings plan for people who, when they're grown, would be able to have a disability benefit. But not all families are fortunate enough to have the money to put away.
Reprise de débat.
Resuming debate, the honourable member for Therese de Blainville.